Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the Gießen W15A coffee roaster.
Yeah, we'll really try to go beyond just like the surface level stuff, you know?
Yeah, going deeper than the manual.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly.
Hmm.
So like someone who wants to really get the most out of this machine,
Mm-hmm.
wants to know all the secrets, all the ins and outs, that's who this is for.
Right. And to do that,
Yeah.
we've got two main sources we're going to be using.
Yeah,
We have the actual Gießen W15A manual itself,
that's right.
which is very detailed and technical.
Very thorough.
Very thorough, yes. And we're also going to be using the Coffee Roaster's Companion.
Yeah, great resource for kind of putting all this into context, you know?
Yeah. And so throughout this deep dive, we'll be talking about things like how to actually use this machine, what all the little parts are, how to maintain it, and then we'll also kind of zoom out and talk about coffee roasting in general.
Absolutely.
So we're going to cover everything from how to make sure you don't burn your beans to how to make sure you don't accidentally burn down your kitchen.
Safety first.
Safety first, always.
Always.
Okay, so why don't we just jump right in and start with like getting to know the Gießen W15A itself? Like, what are we dealing with here?
Well, we're dealing with a pretty big machine.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it weighs over 700 kilos.
Whoa.
It's over 2 meters long,
Wow.
almost a meter high. This is a serious piece of equipment.
That's not a countertop appliance.
No, you're going to need some space for this one.
But all that size, that must mean it can roast a lot of beans, right?
Yeah, you can roast up to 15 kilos at a time in this thing.
Wow.
It's designed for like real serious coffee roasting. And part of the reason it can do that is this double drum design that you'll see mentioned in the manual.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that.
That's key to getting that even roast, making sure all the beans are roasted consistently.
So it's like 2 layers of protection against the direct heat.
Yeah, think of it like 2 shields, protecting the beans, making sure they don't get scorched.
I like that. Shields.
Keeps everything nice and even. No more burnt patches or uneven flavors.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Now, one thing that really stood out to me in the manual was how much they emphasize safety.
Oh, absolutely. Safety is paramount with a machine like this. You're dealing with high temperatures, gas, you know.
Yeah.
You got to be careful.
They even specify, like, ANSI FPA codes for gas installation.
Yeah, they're serious about it, and so should you be. Don't mess around with the gas lines unless you know what you're doing. Get a professional.
Absolutely. And the manual, like, it holds your hand through the whole unpacking and setup process.
Yeah, step by step with diagrams and everything. They want to make sure you do it right.
Yeah, they even give you, like, a labeled diagram so you can visually identify every single part.
That's helpful. It's one thing to read about a cooling sieve or a chaff collector, but it's another to actually see where they are on the machine.
Totally.
Makes it much easier to understand how it all works together.
Okay, so we've got the Kihazen unpacked.
Yeah.
It's set up. We're ready to roast. So what's the next step?
Well, now we got to get familiar with the control panel. This is like the cockpit of the roaster. This is where you're going to be spending a lot of your time.
The command center.
Exactly. And it's actually pretty intuitive. You've got 4 main screens, F1 to F4, each with different functions and information displays.
Okay, so what's on F1?
F1 is your main control screen. This is where you set the air temperature and the burner power.
So, like, how hot the air inside the roaster is going to be and how much heat the burner's putting out?
Exactly. But here's something interesting. That burner percentage you set, that's actually an upper limit.
What do you mean?
The machine actually regulates the burner itself to stay within that limit, so you don't have to constantly monitor it.
Oh, that's smart. So it's like a safety feature too, right?
Yeah, it prevents you from accidentally overheating things. And if you've got a newer model, version 7.54 or above, you've got another cool feature cleaning mode.
Ooh, tell me about that.
So when you're roasting, those beans shed this papery skin called chaff. And it gets everywhere.
Ah, I've seen that.
Yeah, it's a pain. But cleaning mode basically helps you get rid of it between roasts. It's like a mini vacuum cleaner for your roaster.
That's awesome.
Keeps everything clean and running smoothly.
So, okay, walk me through the actual steps of using this thing. Like, we've got our beans.
Okay.
We're ready to roast. What do we do?
All right, so first you got to turn on the machine, obviously.
Okay, power it up.
Then you set your air temperature. This is like preheating your oven, getting the roaster to the right temperature before you add the beans.
Got it. So we're setting the stage.
Exactly. Then you add your beans. This is where the real fun begins.
The magic happens.
A magic happens. And as the roast progresses, you're going to be monitoring the temperature, making adjustments as needed. You'll also use the control panel to start the stir, which keeps those beans moving around, roasting evenly. And then the cooling fan when it's time to cool down the beans and stop the roast.
So it's like a dance. We're hitting our cues at the right time.
Exactly. It's all about timing and precision. And once those beans reach that perfect roast level, you hit the release and they tumble down into the cooling sieve.
Okay, so that's where they lose that extra heat and the roasting process finally stops.
Precisely. It's like quenching a hot piece of metal. You want to cool those beans down quickly to lock in those delicious flavors and aromas.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then finally, we let the whole machine cool down.
Absolutely. Give it a break. Let it rest. A well-rested roaster is a happy roaster, ready to take on the next batch.
That sounds like good advice for all of us, actually.
You got that right.
Okay, so we've got the machine itself down, kind of.
Yeah.
But now I want to get into the actual process of roasting, like what's actually happening inside those beans as they change from green to brown.
Oh, that's where things get really interesting. Ready to go a little deeper into the world of coffee roasting?
You know I am.
All right, let's do it.
So, why do we even roast coffee beans in the first place?
That's a great question. I mean, it's not just to make them brown, right?
Right.
Roasting actually transforms the beans on a chemical level. Think of those green coffee beans. They have all this potential flavor locked inside, but it needs to be unlocked.
Okay, so it's not just about color. It's about, changing the chemical makeup of the bean.
Exactly. Roasting creates those aromas and tastes that we love about coffee.
It's like the Coffee Roaster's Companion calls it a symphony of chemical reactions.
Yeah, compounds break down, new ones are formed. It's pretty amazing.
So the bean is, completely different after we roast it.
Oh, yeah. It's like alchemy, turning something ordinary into something extraordinary.
Wow. But before we even get to the roasting part, there's something else we got to consider.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's how those green coffee beans were processed.
Right. The Coffee Roaster's Companion talks about all these different processing methods, like washed natural, pulped natural.
Yeah, I was reading about that. I didn't realize how much that could actually affect the final flavor of the beans.
Oh, it makes a huge difference. It's like, imagine you're baking a cake. The type of flour you use is going to affect the texture and flavor, right?
Yeah.
Same with coffee. The processing method affects the moisture, the density, even the inherent flavors of the bean.
So all that goes into how we roast it.
Absolutely. You got to consider the processing method before you even start roasting. It's like choosing the right ingredients for a recipe.
Okay, that makes sense. And then there's also the different roast degrees, right? Like light, medium, dark, yeah.
Each roast degree brings out different characteristics, creates a whole spectrum of flavors.
Yeah, the Coffee Roaster's Companion lists a bunch. Cinnamon, city, full city, Viennese, French, Italian.
It's like a flavor adventure.
Yeah.
And a lot of specialty roasters actually aim for those lighter roasts.
Yeah, why is that?
They want to preserve those unique characteristics of the bean, the stuff that makes it special.
So a lighter roast lets you taste more of where the bean came from.
Exactly. Like tasting the terroir of a fine wine, you get those subtle nuances that you might miss with a darker roast.
So it's about finding the right roast for the bean.
Exactly. Now, darker roasts, they're great too, but they develop those stronger roasted flavors, smoky, chocolatey, sometimes even burnt notes.
Yeah, they can be really intense.
Right. And sometimes those flavors can mask the delicate flavors of the bean itself.
So it's all about balance.
It is. It's finding that sweet spot where the roast enhances the bean's natural flavors without overwhelming them. So now let's talk about how the Gießen actually applies heat to the beans.
All right, yeah, the manual mentions something about conduction, convection, and radiant heat.
Right, so think of it this way. Conduction is like direct contact, like a pan on a stovetop.
Okay.
Convection is heat circulating through air, like a convection oven.
Got it.
And radiant heat is heat radiating from a source, like the sun, or in this case, the burner in the roaster.
So the Gießen uses all three.
It does. It's a combination of all three.
Wow. And that double drum design we talked about earlier, that plays into this, right?
Absolutely. Remember we said it acts like a shield? Well, it also helps distribute that heat more evenly through convection. The hot air circulates between the drums, creating a more consistent roasting environment.
It's like having a built-in air circulation system.
Exactly. It creates the ideal conditions for those beans to transform.
Speaking of transforming, the manual mentions something called inner bean development. What's that all about?
Ah, good catch. So inner bean development is about making sure the heat penetrates to the core of the bean, not just the surface.
Okay, so it's not just about roasting the outside.
Nope. We want that heat to go all the way through, otherwise you get those underdeveloped
What
flavors.
do those taste like?
Kind of grassy or harsh, not very pleasant.
So it's like baking a cake and having the center still gooey.
Perfect analogy. We want those beans fully cooked, all those flavors developed from the inside out. You can actually tell by looking at them too. Yeah, well-developed beans will have an even color throughout, not just on the surface. And if you break one open, you should see a consistent roast level from the center to the edge.
Interesting. So no more peeking inside to check for doneness?
Well, it helps to check the inside, but you can get a pretty good idea just by looking at the outside.
And then, of course, the ultimate test is the taste, right?
Always. A well-developed bean will have a balanced flavor profile, sweetness, acidity, body, all in harmony.
Okay, so how do we actually make sure we're doing this right? The Coffee Roaster's Companion talks about these 3 commandments of roasting. It makes it sound almost mystical.
Yeah, it's a little dramatic, but think of them more like guiding principles. They're based on years of experience, understanding how coffee beans roast.
Okay, so they're not set in stone.
Not exactly. They're more like guidelines to help you control the roast.
All right, I'm intrigued. What are these commandments? All right, lay them on me.
Yeah.
What are the roasting commandments?
Okay, so the first one is all about energy at the beginning. It says, "Thou shalt apply adequate energy at the beginning of a roast."
Okay, so we got to hit those beans with some serious heat right away.
Yeah, you want to get them up to temp quickly. It's like preheating a pan before you sear a steak?
Okay, so we're jump-starting the process. What's the second commandment?
So commandment number 2 is about the rate of rise, the ROR. It basically says the bean temperature should always be decelerating as the roast goes on.
So, like, instead of blasting them with constant heat, we're easing off the gas as we go.
Exactly. You don't want the temperature rising too fast. If it does, the beans can develop like baked flavors. Not good.
So, slow and steady wins the roast.
You got it. Now, the third commandment, this one might seem kind of counterintuitive.
Oh,
It says, "Thou shalt finish the roast with a high bean temperature rate of rise."
wait, so we're cranking the heat back up right before the end?
Yeah, it seems weird, but that final burst of heat is what helps caramelize the sugars in the beans, bringing out those sweet, complex flavors.
So it's like that last minute browning on a steak,
Yeah.
adding that extra depth.
Exactly. Now, the Coffee Roaster's Companion actually gives some really good examples of how these commandments work in practice.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and they really emphasize looking at the whole roast curve, not just like isolated points.
So get to see the whole picture to understand what's going on.
Exactly. So you've got the machine, you understand the commandments, but how do you actually make sure every batch you roast is just as good as the last?
Yeah, consistency, that's the holy grail.
Mm.
The Coffee Roaster's Companion had some tips about that, right?
Yeah, they talk about things like warming up the roaster properly, making sure your green coffee beans are stored correctly, and managing different batch sizes.
Right. It's all about controlling those variables.
Exactly.
Hmm.
They even have a whole section on warming up the roaster. Like, you wouldn't run a marathon without stretching first, right?
Yeah.
Same with roasting. You got to get that machine warmed up and stable before you start.
And they talk about green coffee storage too, right? Like keeping those beans at the right temperature and humidity.
Yeah, super important. If the moisture content of the beans fluctuates, your roast will be all over the place.
So we're controlling every little detail. What about roasting different batch sizes? Is that a challenge?
It can be. You can't just scale the time up or down. You got to adjust the airflow, the drum speed, the charge temperature. It's like adjusting a recipe. You double the ingredients, you don't just double the cooking time, you have to make other adjustments.
Makes sense. So let's say we've got our process down. How do we actually know if we're doing a good job?
Well, there are a few tools that can help us measure our success, like the bean probe, weight loss measurements, and the refractometer.
Okay, break those down for me.
So the bean probe is like our thermometer. It gives us a reading of the temperature inside the beans, but it's just one piece of the puzzle.
So we can't rely on it completely.
Not entirely. It's an approximation, not an absolute measure. You got to use it in conjunction with other cues, like how the beans look, how they smell.
So we're engaging all our senses.
Exactly. And don't forget about weight loss. Measuring how much weight the beans lose during roasting, that tells us how much moisture has evaporated.
So it's like tracking the progress of a runner. We're using different metrics to see how the race is going.
Exactly. But the real test, the one that matters most, is the taste test.
That's the bottom line, right? If it doesn't taste good, all the data in the world doesn't matter.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now let's talk maintenance. Keeping your Giesen clean and happy is super important.
The manual's got a whole section on that, right?
Oh, yeah, it's very thorough. They give you a schedule, daily, weekly, long-term tasks.
It's like a checklist for keeping your roaster in tip-top shape.
And they really stress daily cleaning. Cleaning the collector, the chaff collector, the cooling sieve, even that internal cyclone.
So we got to be diligent about keeping things clean. It's like washing the dishes after every meal.
Precisely. Prevents buildup, keeps the flavors pure. And don't forget about that little hidden compartment behind the drum. Yeah, you got to access it through a panel on the side and clean it out regularly. You wouldn't believe how much chaff gets stuck back there.
It's like finding hidden treasure.
Uh-huh. Sort of. Now, they also have instructions for adjusting the drum.
Yeah, I saw that.
But, big caveat, they're very clear that this should only be done by a professional.
Yeah, it sounds kind of complicated.
It is. It's not a DIY project. And then they have this whole maintenance plan with service intervals based on how many hours you've been roasting.
So it's like a car. You got to take it in for regular checkups.
Exactly. Preventative maintenance is key. Oh, and they also talk about lubrication.
Important.
Yeah, keep those moving parts happy. They're very specific about the type of grease to use, too. Heat resistant for certain areas, food grade for others.
Wow, they really thought of everything.
They did. All right, so I think we've covered a lot today. We've unpacked this machine, explored the ins and outs of roasting, talked about consistency, maintenance.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
It has. But this is really just the beginning of your coffee roasting journey.
So what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners are walking away with today?
Well, first, operating the Giesen is more than just pushing buttons. You got to understand how this machine works and always prioritize safety.
No roasting accidents.
Exactly. Second, remember those 3 commandments of roasting. They're your guide to delicious, balanced coffee.
Slow and steady with a burst at the end.
You got it. And lastly, don't be afraid to experiment. Try different roast profiles, different beans. Find what you like.
Yeah, have fun with it.
That's the most important part.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Giesen W15A.
A successful dive, I'd say.
But hey, if anyone out there still has questions, about the Giesen or about roasting in general,
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out.
you can always hit us up here at the Deep Dive. We love talking coffee. And of course, check out the Giesen support team, the Coffee Roasters Companion. Those are great resources too.
Absolutely.
All right, well, happy roasting, everyone.
Happy roasting.